So good morning, and thank you all for joining us this week for the Praying with Purpose weekly prayer call. I hope everybody's had a really blessed week. This week we're going to be focusing our prayers on embracing change. And there are a few examples on the screen of some places in the Bible where it talks about how God turned seemingly bad situations into blessings, and he worked them for good. The first one is Genesis 37, where it tells the story of Joseph. And you all probably remember the story where his brothers were jealous that their father loved him more, and so they decided to sell him into slavery. And you can imagine that's a pretty tough thing for somebody to go through. His own brothers, his own flesh and blood, sold him into slavery. And he went through a lot of hard times because of that, but in the end, God worked it for the good. He had a plan, and he used that ill intent of his brothers to save a lot of people and to turn it into a good situation. And then we look at the book of Job, and the book of Job tells us about how Job, who was a good man, lost everything that he loved. He was tortured mentally and physically. His friends kicked him while he was down. I mean, he had a tough time, and he went through a lot of things that felt really terrible while they were in process. But we know the end of Job's story is that God restored him double. And then in the book of Exodus, the Israelites, following Moses out of Egypt, and I've just been reading this. This has been part of my chronological plan, and I thought it was so cool how it fit with the embrace and change topic, that the Israelites, they were so scared as they're leaving, as they're, being taken out of slavery. They're so afraid of dying in the wilderness, or dying because of being attacked by the Egyptian armies, or dying because of starvation on their travels, that there was a time where they said, Moses, why do you allow us to suffer? Why didn't you just leave us alone? Why didn't you just let us be slaves instead of taking us out here to die? Why didn't you just leave us as slaves where we were? Because they were fearful. But in the end, God showed himself faithful every time. He ultimately brought them to freedom through those changes. So this past Sunday at church, one of our leaders, Pastor Allen, he shared a story of how their church, when it was just Community Christian Church, went through a really difficult change a few years back where their church building burned down. And if you think of anything burning down, it's pretty devastating. That's a pretty big, tragic event that anybody would have to go through, just like this was. But over time, the church was rebuilt, and it turns out it was rebuilt better than it was before. And it's the rebuilding of that church that created a better use of space, which allowed for our church, Soul Purpose Church, to come in and share the building. And then the sharing of the building has since led to an amazing act of unity that God has just come in and knit the two churches together, and we are on a journey to combine into one church. And that came from a tragedy, that God has worked that tragedy for a transformation. So I thought that was really a great example of how God can take, a bad situation that seems like it's really terrible, and he can work it for the good. Some of the verses for this week, 2 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, if any man is in Christ, he is a new creature. The old things passed away, and behold, new things have come. And becoming a new creature doesn't happen overnight. That's something that requires change. It's something that takes time, and it requires dying to some of the old things. It requires some painful, difficult changes to happen in a person's life. So it's a tough thing, but in the end it says new things have come. So that's, one of the promises here is that he's going to bring something new out of that pain. Romans 12:2, it says, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed. And transformed is changed. transformation means change. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Job 23:14 says, so he will do to me whatever he has planned. He controls my destiny. So Job's acknowledging that whatever happens, good, bad, and different, that he knows God has a plan through that, and that God is the one in control of his destiny. And the one thing we can count on that we want to never change is, just like in the stories on the previous slide, that God doesn't change, and his faithfulness doesn't change. And Hebrews 13:8 tells us that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today, yes, and forever. So the same way he's turning things for good back in the days of the Israelites being taken out of Egypt and the days of Job, he's doing the same things today. And we can count on that because it tells us that Jesus Christ never changes. So some of the prayer prompts today, you can just see them up on the slide. And that we can endure and embrace the change that we have to face, that we would be a witness to our unbelieving friends and family in the way that we embrace change, that we would remember that God has used difficult changes for growth and transformation in the past, and that he wants to do the same thing today, that we would have willing hearts for us to embrace what God's appointed to us and to trust in his bigger picture, that we could be thankful in all circumstances, allow ourselves to be clay in his hands, and to surrender our attempts at control and let God be God. So we're going to have Nikki start us out this week, and then I will pray, and then we'll close out with Joseph. And if anybody else join that wants to pray, just speak up and we'll have you do it too.